Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse has finally arrived. It arrived about 2 weeks ago, I guess. I know I'm a bit late for putting out this video, but the movie's still in theaters, so if you haven't seen it yet, do yourself a favor and go support this film. And because I'm reviewing this kind of late, here's my official spoiler warning for Across the Spider-Verse. I'm going to be discussing some plot elements and some points that might spoil parts of the movie if you haven't seen it yet. With all that being said, here's my review of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So the movie picks up about a year after the first one. Right off the bat, this is more of a Miles and Gwen story than specifically another solo Miles Morales film. While there are hundreds of spider people in this movie, I love that the film still found a way to evolve the story within the core characters we know and love. I like seeing Miles and Gwen's dynamic go from being two of three main characters in the first film, alongside Peter B. Parker, to making this transition into being the co-leads of this trilogy of Spider-Verse films. Part of the beauty of their relationship is in the way that they can each push each other to grow. Gwen's lost touch with herself and her life outside of the mask, and Miles being her friend helps her reclaim some of that and inspires her to reconnect with the people she does still have in her life. Miles is still learning how to strike the balance between his responsibilities and being a good Spider-Man. He learned what it takes to become Spider-Man in the last film, but his arc this time around is figuring out what it means to actually be a good Spider-Man. Having the job is one thing, but being effectively good at the job is something that has to be learned over time, and not necessarily from one person. This movie also touches on the idea of canon events within the Spider-Verse. The Arachno-Humanoid Poly-Multiverse. Weird name, by the way. Canon events being the specific things that have to happen to every version of Spider-Man at some point in their lives. The inevitable perks and problems that come with the job, and the responsibility you take every time you put on that mask. The characters in the film, namely Miles and Miguel, become divided on how to handle dealing with these canon events, or specifically the ones that say that someone has to die in their lives. Miles argues that isn't the whole point of us being Spider-Men in the first place to save lives? To stop tragedies from happening before they happen all over again? I think that this is one of the things that I find trouble with in this film. A little bit. It's the central conflict seems to be less so about the multiverse and more so about timelines and paradoxes and such. It's more Back to the Future than it is No Way Home.
Even get me started on Doctor Strange and the little nerd back on Earth 1999.
Speaking of Doctor Strange, though, this movie actually reminded me a lot of some of my favorite classic films. The ideas presented here about not knowing if something bad is going to happen, but deciding whether or not it's the best possible outcome to prevent it, is in the core theme of The Imitation Game. The way this movie ends on a satisfying yet dark cliffhanger reminded me a lot of The Empire Strikes Back in a lot of ways. Along with the idea of watching our hero see a vision of people he loves in danger while escaping some city in the clouds and having a conflict with an older, taller version of himself who has red lasers and similar abilities. Anyway, the animation was obviously beautifully done once again. In the first film, we spent time mostly in Miles' universe, so we didn't really get to live in the worlds of the other characters. This movie fixes that and allows the audience to spend time in Gwen's dimension and a little time with Spider-Man India. The film is undeniably artistic in its visual design and storytelling. You're never taken out of the world no matter where you go across the Spider-Verse. My favorite sequence had to be the last universe the characters travel to. The green and red aesthetic in the rain looked really beautiful when Miles was swinging across it, and the visuals were outstanding. It reminded me a lot of some elements of Batman the Animated Series. Maybe that was on purpose? Well, I think that about wraps up my thoughts on this one. Am I forgetting anything?
I am the Spot. It's not funny.
Oh yeah, the Spot. When I first heard he was the villain for this film, I thought it was sort of a weird choice, but I trusted the team to see what they could do with this character. I mean, I love Jason Schwartzman's performance, and I think he serves a good foil for Miles, or a dark mirror in a way. Both characters want to be seen, want to be appreciated for who they are by Spider-Man. For Miles, it's Spider-Man 2099. For Spot, it's Spider-Man Miles Morales. Ironically. And the beautiful thing is that it takes each of them on a bit of a dark journey across the multiverse in order to prove their value to their respective Spider-Men in their lives. I think in the next film, now that Miles understands what it's like to be looked down upon, criticized, and ridiculed by Spider-Man, or not being seen as good enough, or someone who never belonged in the first place, maybe he can use his newfound empathy to get through to Spot and to stop him in order for him to save his dad. There's so much more I could go on about and talk about in this movie, but I gotta wrap this video up pretty soon. For me, I have to say that I think I enjoyed the first film more as a whole on its own. This one is good, but it does have a bit of a cliffhanger problem, and it's written and intended to be that way. I guess it only feels weird to me because on one hand, we're still following and evolving Miles Morales' story, and his story reaches a bit of a climax, but doesn't really come to any sort of resolution or ending here. However, if you look at this movie as more of a Miles and Gwen film, she gets a completed character arc throughout, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what's coming next for our Spider Gang, and where things are going to go in the finale of this trilogy, Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse. And that concludes this mini-series of taking a look at the Spider-Verse films, starting out with watching all of the Spider-Man shows in celebration, and then moving on to reviewing Into the Spider-Verse, and now talking about Across the Spider-Verse. I am a huge Spider-Man fan, but sometimes even I get a little superhero fatigue. And for me, whenever that happens, I like to spend some time in another universe. Until then, guys, I'll see you in the next video. Let me know what you thought of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse in the comments down below, and have yourself